In this voice thread, these are the structures that are most important, shown on this slide, but I'll be pointing out other structures as well that will be important later. There's no harm in seeing structures over and over. It's important to be able to identify the general rostrocaudal extent of the brain that you're in. Each rostrocaudal vesicle has a ventricular system associated with it. The telencephalon, which is equivalent to the forebrain in the human, is associated with the lateral ventricles. The diencephalon is associated with the third ventricle. The mesencephalon is associated with the cerebral aqueduct. The met and myelencephalon are both associated with the fourth ventricle. Remember, specific structures are within these parts of the brains that were developmentally determined as listed in this slide. And this holds in the adult as well. These schematics demonstrate the different developmental vesicles of the rat brain. The top mid-sagittal section allows us to see the telencephalon with the lateral ventricles, the diencephalon with the midline third ventricle, the mesencephalon with the cerebral aqueduct, which is nearly impossible to see in the rodent, and the brainstem, the rest of the brainstem with the met and myencephalon associated with the fourth ventricle. The telencephalic structures, the caudate nucleus is always lateral to the lateral ventricle. So here is your striatum, and your lateral ventricles are here. So this green is always the striatum. It's always lateral to the lateral ventricle. And the hippocampus is always medial to the lateral ventricle. So here is your lateral ventricle, and here is your hippocampus. And that holds all the way. So here's lateral ventricle, and here's hippocampus, lateral ventricle. The diencephalic structures, such as the hypothalamus and thalamus, border the third ventricle. So your third ventricle is approximately here, and this is your hypothalamus, and this is your thalamus. And then the periaqueductal gray surrounds the cerebral aqueduct, which is in the mesencephalon. So this is the periaqueductal gray, and this is the cerebral aqueduct here, seen best in the coronal section. And then the metencephalon cerebellum is on the roof of the fourth ventricle. The slide below is a crustal violet stain section close to the midline, which is shown above. So sorry for the quality of the gross brain section here, but so this is the olfactory bulb. Cerebral cortex. Corpus callosum is the white matter. see the lateral ventricle. We can see choroid plexus. This is the thalamus. Hypothalamus. Uh, the third ventricle has been taken off here, but it would be outlined here and here. Pons. Superior or rostral colliculus. Now, I just want to make a mention, because the rat does not have the mesencephalic flexure that the human has, the proper terms are the rostral and caudal colliculus, but we call them in superior and inferior, even though they are not superior and inferior to each other. They are um, rostral and caudal to one another. So this is the inferior colliculus or the caudal colliculus. And we have the fourth ventricle. Cerebellum. And the medulla. So the sagittal section here shows us what anterior, posterior level that we're at. And over here is ACHE staining. It stands for acetylcholinesterase, which is an enzyme that breaks down acetylcholine. Acetylcholinesterase is located in cholinergic cell bodies and axons, and maybe other places as well. It is a very useful stain for illustrating many structures in the brain. And just to remind you that this is cressyl violet on the left, which is a Nissl stain, which stains RNA and is useful for uh, revealing structures. So we have our cingulate cortex. We have the cingulum, which is a little difficult to see, but it's a white matter that's right here. The caudate nucleus, also called the striatum. Lateral ventricle. We have some choroid plexus here. We have the medial septum, it's a basal forebrain structure. We have a crossing white matter called the anterior commissure. We have the hypothalamus. We have the basal forebrain here, or also known as the nucleus basalis. We have a little bit of the globus pallidus on this side, just a little bit on this one. We have the corpus callosum, crossing white matter. And we have the third ventricle here. Once again, we have the cingulate cortex. And our little white matter patch here, which is cingulum. We have lateral ventricle. We have choroid plexus that makes the CSF in the lateral ventricle. We have the hole that empties into the third ventricle from the lateral ventricle. And this is the foramen of Monroe. We have the third ventricle. We have this white matter tract that comes from the hippocampus going towards the mammillary bodies, and this is the fimbria part of it. And then we have the fornix, which is the columns that are coming down of the same axons. We have the hypothalamus that is bordering the ventral third ventricle. We have the corpus callosum, crossing white matter. We have on this white matter here is called the optic chiasm. We have the striatum, or the caudate nucleus. And we have the globus pallidus. And right here, we have the nucleus basalis. Once again, we have the cingulate cortex. And then we have the cingulum, which is a small white matter tract. We have the corpus callosum. We have the hippocampus. This is the dorsal hippocampus. We have lateral ventricles. We have choroid plexus inside the lateral ventricle. We have the fornix. We have the hypothalamus bordering the third ventricle. We have the optic tract. We have the internal capsule. This is more akin to the posterior limb of the internal capsule in the human. Rats don't have an anterior limb. So this is still striatum, or also caudate nucleus. This is the amygdala. And this is the third ventricle. And then this is the white matter coming off of the hippocampus, called the fimbria. Cingulate cortex. Small white matter tract that hooks up all of the cingulate cortex is there. Cingulum. Corpus callosum, crossing fibers. The hippocampus. The mammillary body of the rat. We have our lateral geniculate. And the medial geniculate. We have the cerebral peduncle, which is white matter here and here. We have the substantia nigra. This is the pars compacta. We have the ventral tegmental area. These are all dopaminergic neurons. We have the cerebral aqueduct. And we have the optic tract here. It's actually number 13. And the red nucleus is here, number 12. This white matter here, going across the brain, is the posterior commissure. We're in the mesencephalon now. This is the cerebral aqueduct. This is the superior colliculus, or the rostral colliculus. This is the base of the pons here. This is the hippocampus. And this white matter here is the cerebral peduncle. We're in the medulla now. We can see the cerebellum. We have our fourth ventricle. And we have our pyramids, white matter. And you can see the fourth ventricle is stuffed with choroid plexus. This is the cingulate cortex, all of this. This is the corpus callosum. This is the body of the fornix here. And the columns of the fornix here. This is the striatum. This is the nucleus accumbens. This is a crossing fibers called the anterior commissure. This part right here is called the medial septum, and the basal forebrain is here. We have the optic chiasm. We have the optic tract, the thalamus, the hypothalamus, we have the mesencephalon, we have the superior colliculus, the inferior colliculus, oops, all of this, pons is here, the medulla, fourth ventricle, cerebellum, all right, we have the cingulate cortex, we have the corpus callosum, we have the caudate nucleus or the striatum, I don't really see it in the ACHE section. We have lateral ventricle, with choroid plexus inside. We have the hippocampus. We have superior colliculus. And the inferior colliculus. And this is the cerebellum. This is a fairly dorsal horizontal section. All right, we have the cingulate cortex here. We have the fimbria. We have the caudate nucleus, also called the striatum. You can see it's striated. Also like to mention that the rat has no putamen. It's the caudate and putamen together. Sorry, this is 3. We have the third ventricle. We have the thalamus. We have a little bit of the globus pallidus here and here, a little bit bigger one here and here, of the hippocampus, and we have the cerebellum. Here's the cerebral cortex here. And we've got the caudate here. And then we're very ventral here. And so this is the nucleus accumbens. We have a little bit of the globus pallidus. We have the fornix, white matter, little dots that I circled. We have third ventricle. We have the hippocampus. We have the cerebral peduncle. We have the optic tract, which is this here. And we have the substantia nigra. And we have another white matter tract here and here. The mammillothalamic tract. And we are in the hypothalamus here.